How could socialism work? In a previous video, I talked a little bit about communism, whether or not it could work. In this video, I want to explore socialism. And I want to answer the question a little differently, or ask a different question. And that is, what would it take for socialism to be successful? So in my estimation, there are at a minimum 5 things that need to happen to make socialism work. And there's probably more. I'm probably missing a few, but 5 at a minimum. Let's look at these. Number 1, you would need to manage the corruptibility of the system as a whole. Number 2, you need to find a way to motivate humans. Number 3, you're going to need to discover some way to provide meaning and purpose found in either happiness or work. Number 4, you're going to need to find a way to grow people and achieve success without struggle, hardship, and conflict. And number 5, we're going to need to agree on some definition of fairness. So these are basically the 5 things you're going to need to figure out for socialism to work. Let's talk through these one at a time. Number 1, manage the corruptibility. So in any system, doesn't matter what the system is, whether it's a software system or a political system or social system, whatever it is, every system is subject to corruptibility. There's no such thing as a perfect system. You have to be able to manage the corruption. What is corruption? Corruption is when a node in the system, or in our case, a person in the system, basically starts moving away from the intended goal of the system. They start working towards different goals, different purposes. It could be selfish, or it could be something that's just misaligned, but that's a corruption of a node in the system. Every system is subject to corruption and subject to failure. One of the things that makes capitalism, especially in democracies, so successful is when there is a corruption in the system, a single node has a limited scope in terms of what it can also corrupt. It's called decentralization. So from a socialist perspective, we would need to take that lesson and make sure we do the same thing. We would want to decentralize the decision making. The more you centralize, the more it's likely that a corrupting agent on a key node is going to cause a cascade failure. Again, we see this in software, we see this in human systems. It doesn't matter. A system is a system. So you'd absolutely have to make sure to decentralize. In addition to decentralization, we would probably want to look at something with checks and balances. I think this is one of the reasons why the Roman Empire lasted so long, and I think it's one of the reasons why the United States government is surviving as long as it has, is the idea that we're going to create checks and balances. So if one branch of the government becomes corrupted, the other branches are insulated. They're basically firewalled out, and you are less likely to have a corruption of the entire system. So between the checks and balances you want to create in your government and the decentralization, pushing decisions down to as local as possible, we're limiting the ability for corruption to corrupt the whole system, for a cascade failure. So for a socialist system to work, you would absolutely want to do the same thing. You would make sure that you decentralize. This is not something we've seen. The vast majority of socialist states that we've seen in the last 100 years are socialist dictatorships. It's an individual, it's a totalitarian state. So when that one person becomes corrupted, which doesn't take long typically, it cascade failures to the whole system, and the whole system is corrupt. So that's number 1. You have to manage the corruptibility. Number 2, we need to find a way to motivate humans to work beyond them getting to keep their fruits of their labors. I talked about this in my communism video a little bit, and I'm going to reiterate just a little bit here. I'm not going to go into terrible detail because, again, I talked about it there. But in a socialist state, you would absolutely need to make sure that people are motivated to work. You want to get everybody's best, because if you're not getting everybody's best, that's wasted effort. From a lean perspective, that's waste. We're not providing the most value that we can. So how do we deal with that? That's a hard problem to solve. Dealing with motivations, generally the way we see that is through people keeping the fruits of their labor. So do you allow people to keep some of the fruits of their labor? Well, this starts to violate the idea of fairness, which we'll come to later on, potentially. What is the limit to that? Is there an arbitrary amount? Does that change over time? How do you regulate that? Who on earth is wise enough to be able to figure out what that amount is for any given person in any given situation? I'm certainly not. Maybe you come up with an AI that could do it, but without that, what does that look like? So I don't know the answer to that. And even if you did, is that still something that you want to do? We're still allowing for corruption to be encouraged, the corruption that people complain about in a capitalist system, which is if you're able to keep the fruits of your labor, you're able to hoard things, and those can't be used for other people. Even to some degree, that's still pulling resources out of the proverbial pot, as it were. So I'm not sure that allowing people to gain the fruits of their labor to any degree really moves you any better off than you are in capitalism, for those that are opposed to capitalism. So how do you motivate? I don't know the answer to this. I really don't. I am not imaginative enough or smart enough to figure out the answer to that. But in a socialist economy, we would definitely need to figure out, how do you motivate people without them enjoying the fruits of their labors? Number 3, we need to be able to discover meaning and purpose and happiness and in work. There's a lot in here, so let me dive into this a little bit more. I want to focus on happiness. There's a lot of people that are touting socialism and communism, but socialism in particular right now, that are claiming that the whole purpose is to make sure that the government provides happiness to its people. Okay, let's look at that for a moment. First off, I'm not aware of any constitution or government on the planet that says that we are going to responsible for providing happiness to our people. There are some people that would say, well, the US Constitution provides that. Well, hold on a second. Let's look at that for a moment. The Declaration of Independence, which is not the Constitution, it says that the Creator, that which created everything, grants the right, the inalienable right, for people to pursue happiness. That is a far cry from government required or being responsible to provide happiness. But let's assume for the moment that it does say that our Constitution includes the Declaration of Independence, which it does not. We reference it as a part of judicial arguments and judicial agreements, but it is not part of the Constitution. But let's say it is. And let's say that the language is a little different, and that what it really says is the government shall provide for the happiness of its citizens. So let's pretend for a moment. What is happiness? I'm not sure that we understand the definition of happiness. There's at least 3 that I understand. So let's go through those really fast, and we'll talk about whether or not the government can or should provide that happiness. A, happiness as meaning and purpose. Now, this seems like a pretty good one. Happiness is meaning and purpose. The problem with that is meaning and purpose is not found in things. You can't find it in wealth. You can't find it in accumulating things. Meaning and purpose is found by aligning your life, your actions, your words, your living with a higher purpose, a higher meaning, a higher set of values. You're aligning what you do to something greater than yourself. That's meaning and purpose. Could socialism itself, the existence of a state that is the good for all, be the higher purpose? Okay, maybe for some people. It's not going to satisfy everybody. And so there's going to be people that don't have that meaning and purpose. So that's a problem. You would need to figure that out if that's the definition of happiness we want to use. The second definition of happiness that people will throw out often is the idea that we increase our gratitude and we decrease our expectation. Well, that sounds great. In fact, that can lead to a life that is very, very pleasant to live. The problem is no one can make you do that. That's an attitude. You're choosing gratitude, and you're choosing to have lower expectations. I would also argue lower expectations isn't necessarily a good thing, but combined with gratitude, and gratitude being the really important part of that, that could certainly lead to a life filled with happiness. But what it's really leading to is a life filled with gratitude, which is a positive life in and of itself. And again, the government cannot do anything about that. That's your choice. That's about how you choose to approach life, not something the government can provide for you. So that one's out. C, happiness as an increase in pleasure and a decrease in pain. Now, this is the one that most people are going to latch onto. This is the one that most people are going to say, yeah, that's what I mean when I say happiness. Let's look at that for a moment. Pleasure and pain are temporal phenomenon. What do I mean by that? You don't experience pleasure or pain timelessly. You experience them in the moment. You experience them as long as time is allowing you to experience them. You're trapped in time with those sensations, with those feelings. Once the time elapses from whatever's happening with it, the pleasure and pain immediately subsides, and very, very quickly. These are temporal phenomenon, and they are phenomenon because time is associated with them. We suffer. Now, it's weird to think of suffering pleasure, but let me expand on this a little bit. If your goal is to pursue pleasure and to remove pain, what you're doing is you're putting pleasure in the highest place. You're making it your God. It's the thing that you are pursuing more than everything else. When you do that, you are inviting something in to have its way with you. Anyone that is struggling with addiction or has struggled with addiction knows exactly what I'm talking about. Anything that is pleasure that you seek for its own sake will create something in you that craves that you can't really control. You may want to do something else, but it forces you to crave something that is not in your best interest. And so now pleasure has a hold of you, and you suffer pleasure just as you suffer pain. Why? Because you put pleasure and pain in the highest point. You made it your God. You made it the thing that you want to pursue above all else. When we define happiness as the increase in pleasure and the decrease in pain, we are exactly doing that. We are putting pleasure and pain in the highest place, or at least pleasure. And once you do that, you are now capable of having an addiction. And by the way, we're all capable of having an addiction. I am not judging because I have gone through addiction myself. It is a very unpleasant experience, knowing that you don't have control of those cravings. There's something else inside you that has taken hold and forces you to seek that pleasure. That creates a slave mindset. We're either a slave to the craving, or if somebody finds out about that craving, that addiction, we can become a slave to them because they can use that against us. So if the government is going to provide pleasure and remove pain, they are becoming the equivalent of a drug dealer. They are able to enslave us through that pleasure and pain. That is not a good thing. Anyone that struggles with addiction will tell you the same thing. That is not a good thing. So out of those three definitions, I think A is the only one that makes any kind of sense: meaning and purpose. So for socialism to work, we have to find a way for socialism to provide meaning and purpose in work. That is really hard. Again, maybe you get people to align towards socialism itself being the greatest good. I'm not sure that you're going to get everybody there. In fact, I'm almost positive you won't. So what do you do with everybody else? Once again, I am not imaginative enough or smart enough to figure that out. Somebody much smarter than I will need to figure out, how do you create meaning and purpose in life without being aligned to something greater if socialism itself isn't that thing? So that's number 3. Number 4. We need to find a way for human beings to grow and achieve success without struggle, hardship, and conflict. This is an interesting one. So if you look at all of the wonderfully successful people in history, whether it's in sports, whether it's in movies or music or politics, whatever it is, every single one of them, and you can look in modern history for this, every single one of them has some tragic story in their past, something that was some horrible hardship, a tragic sadness of something through which they suffered. It turns out that the suffering is what allowed them to become the person that is successful. Now, this seems counterintuitive to a lot of people. A lot of people think if we can just provide for people's basic needs, they will be able to thrive. But that's not it at all. We miss the whole point. The suffering is what allows the transformation to happen for that person to become the kind of person that is able to achieve the success. It's the hero's journey. It's the transformation. It is the journey from someone who is suffering and having hardship and having difficulty and conflict, transforming into someone else, getting rid of something old and embracing something new, growing into the kind of person that's capable of overcoming that hardship. Once they do that, they are now a person that's capable of overcoming many more hardships. And that's the kind of person that sees success. That's the kind of person that achieves greatness. You don't achieve greatness by being given everything. You achieve greatness by struggling, transforming, and overcoming. This is why we love the hero's journey. Across cultures, across the world, the hero's journey is very, very valuable to us. It is a lesson of transforming from someone that's not capable of handling life to someone that's capable of handling everything life has to offer. Now, we certainly don't want the hardships to be so hard that they crush us, but it is important that we go through hardships. I'm not saying that pain and suffering are good. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying the overcoming of pain and suffering is good, and one of the greatest goods. It's one of the greatest things that we can do. It's why we love the hero's journey. We need that transformation, those stories of transformation, because they remind us that no matter what life is throwing at us, we are capable of overcoming if we just shed the things that we need and embrace the things that are going to pull us forward. We too can overcome. We too can be the hero of our own story. That transformation is so critical. So from a socialist perspective, we have to honor that story, because it's not just a story, it's a fundamental truth about human beings. If you remove the hardships, if you remove the pain, the things that force us into overcoming, how on earth are we going to grow? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. People don't grow when things are wonderful. You enjoy the good times, but you grow through the bad. You have to allow for suffering to some degree for people to overcome. Now, once again, It can't be so much that it crushes them. And so it is good to make sure that there's maybe some safety nets, or maybe there's a community around you. Very important thing. Make sure if you have a loving family, and if you don't have a loving family, find another community, find a church, find a community group, find people that are going to support you and encourage you, not enable you, but actually encourage you to become the hero of your own journey. That's the transformation that is needed to make sure that we actually have a workforce that is capable of doing wonderful things and not simply slacking off. That's a big problem. And I don't know how in a socialist world you get rid of that. If you're providing universal basic income as a simple example, you are necessarily removing some of the pain that actually forces people to transform themselves into someone that is a better version of themselves. So once again, you would have to figure that out. I do not understand how to do that. I'm not smart enough to figure out what that looks like in a socialist world. But that is number 4 on the list of what you'd have to figure out to make socialism work. Number 5, and this may be the biggest one, the hardest one of all 5 of them. We need to agree on a definition of fairness. And to be clear, we don't. I don't want to bury the lead on this. So let me give you a simple little example so we can kind of explain why we don't agree on fairness. Let's imagine for a moment that you have parents, and the parents are finally in an economic situation where they can afford to pay allowance to their 2 children, a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old. And they look to the 10-year-old and say, we are now going to pay you allowance, $10 a week. We have the means to do it, and you're old enough to be able to do that. Well, the 8-year-old might look at that and say, hey, that's not fair. Why does he get money and I don't? I deserve allowance too. So now let's say that the parents give the 8-year-old $10 a week as well. Now the 10-year-old may look and say, hey, that's not fair. I had to wait till I was 10. I didn't get allowance when I was 8. That's not fair. So what's fair? Is it fair? There's at least 3 scenarios. There's probably a 4th as well. There's at least 3 scenarios. In scenario 1, the 10-year-old gets an allowance and the 8-year-old doesn't. The 8-year-old is told, when you turn 10, you will then be allowed to get allowance. Is that fair? Some people will say yes. Some people will say no. Scenario 2, the 10-year-old gets $10 a week and the 8-year-old gets $10 a week. And the 10-year-old just has to deal with the fact that they're losing out on 2 years of allowance. Is that fair? Some people will say yes. Some people will say no. And by the way, if you just give the 10-year-old a lump sum for the last 2 years, the 8-year-old's still going to cry not fair because they want the big lump sum as well. Scenario 3, maybe there's some compromise. Maybe you give the 10-year-old $10 a week, and maybe you give the 8-year-old $5 a week or $3 a week, and then you graduate that up until they get $10 a week. Is that fair? Those are 3 different scenarios, and I guarantee if you ask 10 different people, you're going to get a very interesting mix of people that describe which is fair and which is not. We don't agree on the definition of fairness. Now, there's a 4th in that scenario, and that would be, well, why don't you just make it work-based? If the 10-year-old does chores, if the 8-year-old does chores, you reward the chores rather than just giving them allowance. Okay, but that's capitalism. We're trying to get rid of capitalism, remember? So that one's straight out. We don't agree on fairness, and chances are we're probably split pretty evenly in terms of what we think fairness is out of those 3 scenarios. If we don't agree on fairness in something as simple as allowance for children, how on earth are we going to figure out what is fair in a society at large? What we're going to see is an improper and an imbalanced application of justice across the board. By the way, we see this already today. This isn't unique to socialism or communism. We see it in capitalism as well. We see it when there are people that have different definitions of fairness, and so justice is meted out differently depending on your perception, your definition of fairness. We don't agree on fairness. Socialism does not improve the situation one little bit. Communism doesn't improve the situation one little bit. We don't agree on what fair is. Therefore, socialism is going to have to contend with this just like any other political system would. So there you go. There's your 5 things at a minimum you would have to overcome. I do want to throw one more thing out. I've heard from a few different people that what they're really looking for is their handout. They want to be subsidized. They want their living to be subsidized so that they don't have to work. Well, to those individuals, if you find yourself in that camp, might I suggest that socialism and communism may not be the best choice for you, because in socialism and communism, you will be expected to work. You will absolutely be expected to pull your weight, to contribute your fair share. And if you don't do that, you will be punished. Your best bet, if all you're looking for is a handout, is to live off the benefits of the government, to live and pull from the treasury of the government and the country in which you live. Your best bet is a capitalist system with a welfare state. I hope this was enlightening. If not enlightening, I hope it was at least informative and entertaining for you. Keep bringing awesome to the people.